Guest is with me already, Babatunde Oluajo, who is a governance and policy analyst. He is an anti-corruption activist and Chevening scholar, and currently serves as the anti-corruption advisor for the Integrity Organization. Welcome to you, and thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much.
How much is how much is corruption a conversation that, or fighting corruption, a conversation that we should have on the African continent? Because from my research, over half of Africans think that corruption is increasing. You know, in South Africa, for example, more than 4 in 5 people say they have seen corruption rise recently. Here in Nigeria, we do know that there was a survey done last year by UNODC and the NBS that released startling figures. They said that, you know, Nigerians do pay bribes, indicted our police officers, our judicial officers, and all of that. So how much of this corruption conversation should we be having? And actions, actually, because we do converse about corruption on the African continent, but actions.
Well, to quote General Buhari in one of his speeches, he said, if we don't kill corruption, corruption will kill us. Yeah. And that is the reality of Africa. Because, I mean, just taking illicit financial flows alone, the Mbeki panel said Africa loses roughly about 50 billion annually. And for Nigeria, there are statistics that about half of our annual budget is lost to corruption. And it is not different in most African countries, maybe with the exception of 1 or 2. So it is not just a conversation we should be having. It is something that we need to focus on, except Africa is able to tackle it. Because the shocking reality about it is that corruption itself, in terms of stealing public funds, actually constitutes a minute percentage of money. I mean, what is lost to corruption? Illicit financial flows from what is seemingly legitimate business, money lost to crime, human trafficking, drugs, and all the rest. And what facilitates this other forms of corruption is actually ineffective leadership. Because when the leadership itself is corrupt, it cannot frontally tackle illicit financial flows. It cannot tackle, the various oligarchies that are involved in crime. So it is actually a vicious circle. So if Africa must survive, it is something that needs to be frontally discussed, not just discussed, but it must, come up with, strategies to stem this hemorrhage. Because what we lost to corruption is actually more than what comes in as FDI. It's more than what comes in form of aid. Yeah. So it simply means that in the real sense, Africa subsidizes the rest of the world. Unfortunately, we do this through corruption.
I think you just raised a very fundamental issue that Africa subsidizes the rest of the world through corrupt practices, isn't it? And if we take a look at the methodologies of fighting corruption, do you think that they've been successful? Here in Nigeria, we do have the EFCC. It was created. In Senegal, they do have the fraud and the anti-corruption office that was created. In Tanzania, now President Magufuli is fighting corruption. That's in Tanzania. In some other countries too, you have some agencies have been created. But are those methodologies enough to fight corruption?
They are not enough. They are definitely not enough. Because if they have been enough, we would have seen a fundamental shift. We would have seen, a drastic reduction. But from what the report of the UNODC on Nigeria, from the research you quoted about South Africa, people are telling you that corruption appears to be increasing. Therefore means we need to do something differently. And one of the things we need to do differently is that we need to ask ourselves, what is it that is at the root of corruption? And one thing that is at the root of corruption is impunity. The fact that people have no fear of retribution. The fact that people have no fear that if I do this, if I do the crime, I'm going to do the time. In other parts of the world, they are not fundamentally different from us. What keeps people in check is the fact that they are sure that 90% of the time, if they commit a crime, they're going to be caught and then they're going to pay. But in Africa, in Nigeria especially, people have lost that fear. The fear is no longer there. And if you don't address it, there's no way you're going to have a change. And because President Buhari was talking about strong institutions, in the course of the AU meet. But the point is this: how can you have strong institutions when institutions are not on auto response? Let me give you an example. If somebody who's politically connected, for example, commits a murder now, the police formation in that area will not move. Because you will be afraid that this man is politically connected. You say that they are waiting for the commissioner, and the commissioner will be waiting for the IG, and the IG will be looking on to the president that he wants to read his body language, if they should move or not. In serious societies of the world, public institutions that are created, that have been given certain mandates, they don't wait for anybody before they move. So that is part of the problem. So we too need to come back. It's not enough to talk about strong institutions. Here in Nigeria, I mean, the president should ask himself a question. Our institutions, are they responsive? Are they functional? You have killings in Benue, and an IG has to be directed for us. I mean, it's a shame. And that is the same thing with EFCC. You see somebody whose hand has been found in public till, and then somebody has to wait to be directed. You don't build institutions that needs to look at the body language of a head of state, look at the body language of a commissioner of police before they do their job. So if you don't, and that's what breeds impunity, because people don't have that fear. If once you can tackle impunity, I think we can start talking about tackling corruption. Until we get to that point where our institutions are an auto-response, we cannot address corruption.
So you're saying that impunity drives this corrupt practices more.
Exactly.
Because there is no punishment for whatever.
People are not afraid. They're not even afraid that they will be punished. And even when they are caught, you see cases dragging for 10, 15 years, and then the man is enjoying the process of crime. In other parts of the world, the first thing you do is to deny such persons the enjoyment of the process of crime. But here, 15 years is in court, and he's still enjoying the process of crime. So, I mean, where is the, I mean, what message are you sending to society?
Who should lead this crusade of fighting anti-corruption, or fighting corruption in Africa? Because it seems that African leaders, in one way or the other, their posture at fighting corruption is not encouraging the fight against corruption. Because they say the fish spoils from the head, isn't it? What kind of leaders, or the kind of leadership we've seen in Africa, it's a leadership that is not fighting corruption in real sense. We do know what's happening in South Africa. Jacob Zuma, he's having problems right now with his party and all of that. He survived, you know, he survived by the whisker. I think more than 4 times, you know, at the Congress, at their parliament, South African parliament. So I can give examples like that in Africa. We do know a lot of presidents in Africa. What can actually be done?
First and foremost, I mean, fighting corruption cannot be left to the government alone. Because those who suffer the impact of corruption actually
are the citizens.
The ordinary citizens, the poorest of the poor.
The poor are getting poorer.
Exactly, because you know what corruption does is to divert critically needed resources from those critical areas of our national life. It diverts it away from health, investment in infrastructure, education, which ought, I mean, these are services that the poor, I mean, they need critically. The rich they can find an alternative, but for the poorest of the poor, they have no alternative. If the state does not provide those things, those services, they have nowhere else to go. And that is the reason why the poor must be educated to the point where they understand. And I think the elites in Africa, I mean, the middle class in Africa, who are quote unquote, I mean, has a duty to play. Because what happens is this: at any time in point that I need to contribute money to take a relative to hospital, I'm subsidizing the state because that's failed. Anytime I need to contribute money to send the cousin to school, I'm subsidizing the state because the state has failed in its duty. So we must know that for corruption, not just the poorest of the poor, but for those of us who are supposed to be the middle class, we pay more. Because okay, let's take an example. What is the business of an average Englishman or an average American to be concerned about a relative is sick? If you are sick, I mean, in the UK, the NHS will take care of you. I mean, you can, if you are homeless, I mean, the council flats are there for you. So it is not my business, therefore, that a relative is sick or is homeless. But in this part of the world, it is our critical business because there is no safety net for those persons. So if we don't join in that crusade to fight corruption, we'll continue to pay.
Yeah, because we, as citizens of Africa, or as citizens of the African continent, citizens of our various countries, if you look at Liberia, for example, for citizens to access basic healthcare in Liberia, they pay bribes to the health officials. If they go to the healthcare centers, they pay bribes. Liberians pay bribes. Please take care of my child. He or she is sick. They pay bribes to have access to healthcare. So, beyond that, the leadership should do more. You said that the citizens should do more. But do you think that perhaps African citizens, or yes, as Africans, we are condoning more of the corrupt leaders that we have, so to speak? That we are so docile, we've not done anything yet than talking, speaking, you know. We need to increase our level of engagement. We need to increase our level of, you know, of making it louder there that corruption is indeed hurting our continent.
I think as citizens, we need to do more in terms of our civic responsibility to society. We need to not just only talk about these things, we need to start to resist. We need to start to push back. Because except we push back, I mean, corruption...
Then how do we push back?
Number one is that we need to get organized. We must make this, I mean, the issue to be discussed. I mean, we must put it in the front burner. It's not just about going out once every 4 years to go and queue up and vote. It's about asking those critical questions to say, this is a problem that's confronting us. What is your solution? This, I mean, this is our reality. This is the lived reality. This is the reality we face on a daily basis. What do you think you can do about it? No, and not just that. To equally start pushing, to start pointing out those areas of our national life where corruption is endemic.
Now, should we even actually wait for elections to come, the election cycle to come before we start pushing back on some of these illicit activities that we're seeing that are depriving us as Africans of the much needed good that we're supposed to see in our society?
Definitely not. And that's why I said that democracy goes beyond just voting.
Voting.
I mean, after the elections, that's when the real job starts. That's when the office of the citizens should now take over and start to dictate what is public policy. Start to dictate the response of the government to those critical areas of need, to those things that hurt us as citizens. And corruption is something that hurts us all. We pay for it. I mean, the cost of corruption is unquantifiable. For any time a woman dies in the hospital because somebody has diverted money, can you quantify that life? Anytime a child that is under 5 dies needlessly, can you quantify it? Anytime a child who is supposed to be in school ends up on the street, can you quantify the damage to society? Because ultimately, okay, let us think, how did you end up where we are? A country where we are reputed to be people who love life. All of a sudden, human life has become so cheap that we no even longer feel when they say 100 citizens are killed at a go. Can we quantify those losses? They're unquantifiable. And ultimately, the root cause is corruption. Because if today you and I have something to live for, if we are not become so hopeless and so despondent, it will be difficult for us to go and embrace bomb and as a solution to the problem. So for every time resources are diverted from what they are meant for, we are causing problem for society, and the problem is the damage is unquantifiable. That is why we cannot afford as active citizens to keep quiet. Don't think because today you are in a relative comfort. I mean, we have seen people, I mean, who are being killed, I mean, on the basis of insurgency. They are not involved. So it therefore shows that there is no hiding place for anybody. We must be involved in this discourse, and not just a discourse. We must be actively involved in ensuring that our leaders do what they are supposed to do, which is that we need to address corruption.
Okay, let me just take a few, you know, let me just give you a few analysis that, just like my guest said, Mr. Oluajo said that we should not wait for elections to come before, you know, we talk about corruption and all of that. I do also know that corruption is a big issue in African elections, for example. If we take a look at what happened in Ghana, it was in 2016 they voted, if I'm not mistaken, that we do know that Ghana is the second worst decliner in the 2016 Corruption Perception Index in the region, and the dissatisfaction of the citizens with government's corruption record was reflected in their voting patterns. They voted this new president. Cape Verde, Sao Tome and Principe are the most improved African countries in the 2016 index. Now, if we take a look at this, moving forward, don't you think that fighting corruption, just like we've seen in Ghana, for example, and in some other countries in Africa, that fighting corruption should be one of the big issues that we should be looking at? How are you going to solve it? Of course, we saw that President Buhari came in on that mantra, on 3 pillars actually, which fighting corruption was one of it. We'll come to that in a bit, how far he's fared. But how do we address that situation?
Well, I simply think, just like these examples have shown, we have a duty, first and foremost, to vote out those who are just mounting the mantra and who are not doing anything concrete. It's not enough to say we're going to fight corruption. If you are saying you're going to fight corruption, corruption is found in your kitchen cabinet, and you are doing nothing about it, what you are telling us is that you don't deserve our votes because you have failed us. And I simply think we need to follow these examples. Those who have shown commitment, all over the continent, they deserve to be our support. Those who have shown that they're only mouthing it and they cannot do anything if they found it in their closet, then they would deserve to give them, to show them the way out. There's no alternative to it. As I said, we are all victims of corruption.
But as we are all victims of corruption, are we not also all culprits of corruption, in the sense that we also harbor corrupt people or allegedly corrupt people around our inner circle? We harbor and we condone corruption, because, I mean, if you take a look at Nigeria, for example, someone that is very rich, perhaps from corrupt practices that everyone can see, is highly respected in society, and for perhaps some of us that have risen around, along the ladder and all of that, are looked upon, or some poor people that have integrity. They say a good name is better than riches, isn't it? For people like us in Africa, in Nigeria specifically, we don't look at that. Sometimes they are giving chieftaincy titles and all of that.
Well, I think we cannot, our responsibility to educate our citizens and to draw the link between their poverty and public looting.
Yes.
We have a duty to do that. For many people, and that takes us back to Peter Ike's classical work on the two publics in Africa. Because up to now, majority of our citizens don't see government money as their money. Because they will ask you the question, if he does not steal it, would they bring it to me? They don't see that connection between the public looting and their condition, their poverty. Except we're able to draw that link and make it clear to our people, they will not stop to abhor those who are corrupt. And that is our duty as active citizens, as the media, as civil society, as even religious bodies. Because until we do that, we will not. People, for example, you cannot steal from your, town association and anybody class for you. No, you are going to be ostracized. But if you steal from the public, you are going to be celebrated. And as Peter Ike said, that is part of that dichotomy is part of the problem of Africa. People see the government as them, and they see themselves as us. So therefore, when you steal in that public, they don't see it as their money. They see it as the money. In fact, you are a hero because you have gone to bring part of that thing from them to us. But the same people will not condone when you steal their own money in their town association or kindred association. So our duty is to help citizens to come to that understanding that money is not their money. It is our money. You have a stake in that money. So when it is stolen, the man who has stolen it, don't see him as an hero. See him as somebody who is actually trying to perpetuate poverty. And therefore,
because there's a connection.
Don't condone him. But many of our people don't say it.
There is a heavy connection. But
many of our people, an ordinary man on the street does not see it. Because he asks you that, okay, if the man does not steal it, would they bring the money to me? He doesn't see it that stealing is now in political services. So that is the role we need to play to help our citizens understand the link between looting and their own relative condition.
Now, this corruption in public offices, hasn't it also degenerated to the point that we have other smaller levels of corruption? You understand what I mean?
I definitely
do. That we have the corruption in the very higher level, corruption in public offices, then we have subsets.
I agree with you.
Yes.
I mean,
because we can see corrupt practices everywhere, like what the UNODC report and the MBS report did say last year. So you're seeing subsets of it, even in offices, in the private sector, and what have you.
I agree. No, petty corruption. I mean, there's a way mega corruption.
Yes, that's the word, mega corruption.
First, petty corruption.
Yes.
Because number one, you work in an office. You are supposed to be entitled to certain basic things. A director takes all the money for himself. I mean, the message is sending to you is very clear. You too, and the language is wait for your time, wait for your turn to steal. So it's my turn now. Let me steal as much as I can. Because a man who steals money meant for public training in an agency, tell me why he will say anything wrong if a clerk hides file and start demanding for 1,000 before files can be produced. He's not going to say it because by his action, he's actually telling them, you to look for ways to enrich yourself, look for ways to make people. So there's actually a direct link because it's only, I mean, a man of integrity who is leading an organization who can actually insist that people must behave in a way that is ethical.
But doesn't it take more than integrity to fight corruption?
Well, it takes more than that because you must have systems in place. But the starting point is integrity. You may have systems in place, but systems are run by human beings. So if there's no if there's no integrity, if there's no, I mean, if ethical conduct is not encouraged, there are people who subvert systems. It goes beyond integrity. I agree with you absolutely. You need systems that can make it possible for, I mean, that can show that people are not behaving ethically. Those systems are critical. But if you don't have somebody of integrity who is pretending over that system, it is easy to subvert systems. So the two must be there. You must have systems in place. At the same time, you must have a system of integrity that ensures that if at any point in time people are not living by those minimal ethical standards, you can know immediately. The system reports, I mean, shows that people are already beginning to bend the rules. So these things, I mean, they go hand in hand.
Now, let's take a look at what Western powers can actually do to force greater transparency, especially in African nations that, you know, receive significant levels of foreign aid. Because in as much, you said earlier on that African nations subsidize some of these Western nations. So what can Western nations do to, you know, force greater transparency? Because you take a look at some of these African nations are still receiving aid.
Well, I mean, one of the things that they can do, which I think is critical, beyond the issue of aid transparency, ensuring that whatever support they give is spent in a way that is transparent, is the fact that they must insist that African resources remain within the continent. One way is to help us fight illicit financial flows, especially from what is supposed to be legitimate business, trade invoicing, trade misinvoicing, I mean, base erosion. I mean, these are ways that resources, I mean, are taken out of Africa. I think they need to help us fight that. I mean, because if we do that, our resources can remain here. Number two is the fact that, I mean, this idea of this beneficial ownership issue is something to be taken very seriously. And the same thing true for issues of tax havens that has provided safe places for this illicit financial flow. So be careful without anybody detecting. These are critical areas. For example, we know what $50 billion can do for Africa.
That's a lot of money.
And that goes out of Africa through trade misinvoicing alone. So even if that's the only thing the Western world would do for Africa, they would have assisted us.
But do you think that the Western world is actually willing to fight corruption in Africa, or there is just, you know, it's just lip service, so to speak?
Well, for me, they are being compelled.
Or beyond what David Cameron, the former Prime Minister of UK, told us when President Buhari was on his way.
Corrupt.
Yes, that we are fantastically corrupt. Nigerians are fantastically corrupt. And President Buhari, I don't want to go into all of that happened, but we do know. You know?
No, but the point is this. Their own reality is beginning to compel them to take this issue seriously. For example, the issue of irregular migration. I mean, because there's a link between these things. If, for example, there's security of life, property, there are many people who will not embark on those perilous journeys. So they themselves are beginning to see the link between resources, African resources that is being taken out illegally, and those irregular migrations. So for many of them, their own realities begin to compel them to take those issues seriously. But the point is simply this. We owe ourselves the primary responsibility to ensure that our resources remain within our shores and are used for development. But they too have a role to play to support us, because except they do it, they too will continue to suffer the deluge that they are currently suffering.
Now let's come back home. President Buhari, as well as other African leaders, come to office in an anti-corruption ticket, and most of the time we see them not actually living up to expectation. Do you think that President Buhari has implemented his commitment towards the anti-corruption fight?
If you ask me honestly, I will tell you no. Because from whom much is given, much is expected. The number one thing that set him aside during the last election was, quote unquote, his clean person.
His uprightness.
Yes, his uprightness. Because that was what many people, I mean, that was what they sold. That was what many people, thought they were voting for. And
he's going to crack down corruption. And
for me, if you come in on the basis of such a promise, and then we start seeing corruption within your own kitchen cabinet, and no decisive action is taken, you have lost the people. You have lost whatever credibility you have. That is just the point. It goes beyond chasing those in opposition. It goes beyond chasing those who are not close to you. The best way to set an example is to set an example with those who are closest to you.
What do you think would impede President Buhari from doing that? Because he's been accused of fighting corruption, that is one-sided fight.
Selectively.
Yes, selectively. What do you think would impede him from fighting corruption?
You know, there is the political economy of corruption itself. And because you need to understand...
Yeah, the political economic side of it.
Yes, and for me, that is the issue. I mean, election is coming up, you need resources, resources needs to come from somewhere. So the political economic consideration of it, to my mind...
But to the detriment of the people.
Well...
because you're doing that, it's selfish, it's of selfish interest.
I definitely agree with you, that's selfish. And then not just that it's selfish, for me, it puts a big question mark on his own credibility and the type of person that Nigerians thought he was. But when it comes to politics, you know, political consideration can actually bend even the strongest will. Because while you are thinking, okay, this is where we should go, those around you will remind you that if you go this path, by the time the elections come, where are you going to get the money from? Who are those who you think is those people outside that will bring the money? That's what they will be telling you. And as a human being, you at a point you are going to sit back and say, these guys may actually have a point.
So doesn't that mean that our political process and our political system has been running on fallacy, so to speak?
Well, no, but if you be honest with ourselves, has our politics not been dominated by money? It's been money.
Money derived.
I mean, that is just it. Money is about money. It's those who have the money. Okay, tell me, one of the reasons President Buhari lost in the other attempt, one of them was money. Nobody was bringing money. But when those who have the money decided to rally around him, he won the elections, even when he was not in power. So you cannot take away the role of money in our politics as currently constituted. You are talking about a system where even within your party, you know the amount of money, even by the so-called new the Electoral Act. Look at the amount of money you are supposed to pay, although they say it's the maximum. Tell me how an honest man can therefore want to contest with those who have stolen money.
On a minimum wage of 18,000.
Exactly. So these are critical issues that we cannot run away, we cannot shy away from, that we need to address in the long run. But then it takes somebody who has the will. It takes somebody who actually has the, who is a statesman, who is not a politician, because politicians think of the next election. Statesmen think of the next generation. Unfortunately, we have not such persons.
What more do you want to see from President Buhari moving forward? Because the administration, you know, is gradually winding down.
Well, to be honest, I hope it's not too late in the day. But for me, I think President Buhari can actually take a number of steps that can actually, put his name, that can put his footmarks on the sands of time. And one of them is to tackle corruption the way people expect him to tackle it, beginning from his own kitchen cabinet. All those who have been tainted in this government, the minimum he can do for us is to at least tell them to step aside. It doesn't have to be until the people put pressure. For example, we know the case of Babashi. If not for the pressure of Nigerians, the man would still have been in office. It should not be for a president who came into power on the mantra of anti-corruption. It should not be. You should not have a chief of staff that people that has accusation flying left, right, and center about him. It should not be, because what that tells you is that if a man who came to power on the basis of anti-corruption mantra, you have people within your kitchen cabinet who will be accused of such. It simply means they don't share your vision. It simply means you are alone. And if you're alone, there's no way, therefore, you can achieve anything, because they must first share your vision. Because ultimately, they will be the one to drive those visions. They will be the one to run with it. But if they are found in this type of allegations, being accused of all these things, it shows they don't share your vision, and it simply means your vision is dead on arrival.
What would you say about EFCC fighting corruption in Nigeria? And the call for the removal of Magu, Ibrahim Magu, and, you know, the fight against corruption is spearheaded by the anti-corruption body, EFCC.
For me, that brings us back to sharing the vision of the man who is saying he wants to combat corruption. Because the opposition to Magu is not coming from the opposition party. The opposition to Magu is coming from the kitchen cabinet of the president. DSS is writing something different about Magu. And meanwhile, the DSS is under the control of the president. And the president was the one who nominated Magu. You can now see the point I was making about the fact that the president is alone. Those who are supposed to drive his vision don't even share that vision. And because of that, there's no way he's going to succeed. Whatever vision he has is dead on arrival. Those who are supposed to drive it don't believe in it. For me, when it comes to EFCC, my position is that number one, we are supposed to be a country of rules, and order, and then there are processes. We need to respect those processes first and foremost. Number two, I don't think in a country of 180 million, there's just only one man who can deliver. I think there will be other people. And I simply think there's a way you set example.
Do you think the president should heed to the call for the removal of Magu?
For me, there are processes.
Because the way it is now, it's a cat-rat race.
But we cannot continue like that.
Fight.
Because we simply cannot. Because
which is also impeding
the performance of Magu and even AFCC.
Yes, and even other aspects of the economy. Because, for example, the Senate has said that there's an embargo on that till the president hits to what they're saying. So, for example, CBN's nominees have not been approved. Other things are just lying fallow.
We cannot continue like that.
Yes, and it's a cat and rat. Is it Tom and Jerry now? Tom and Jerry fight.
We simply cannot continue like that. For me, I simply think there are processes. The democracy. If the man is supposed to be, his nomination is supposed to be approved by the National Assembly, and he feels that, I simply think we should move on to something else. Because, as I said earlier on, where did the opposition come from? It started from DSS. DSS is supposed to be supervised, is supposed to be reporting to the president. So if the president's nominee is being opposed by an agency that reports to the president, that tells you a lot. So the problem, as far as I'm concerned, is not the National Assembly. It's within the presidency itself and its agencies. Okay. Because it was not the National Assembly that wrote a damning report about him. It was one of the agencies that the president is supposed to be superintending over.
Okay, let's just take a few comments before we round up the program. Charlie says, very true. We can't survive outside government patronage for 1 month. They are ready to kill and do anything despicable to hold on to power. While Dele Jackson says building a new sustainable path to end corrupt practices in Africa and promote transparency throughout government, businesses, and civil society is a necessity. If African states must experience development in all ramifications, it's never too late to kill corruption, now or never. Do we have other comments? Can I take other comments? Okay. Let's see. This. Okay. I think that's the much I can take right now concerning corruption. Okay, let me just take this comment from Emmanuel. As long as the government is running institutions like NNPC, corruption will thrive. Even roads should become concessioned. That's from Emmanuel. What do you think?
Well, the point
that's another dimension.
No, for me, the point is simply this. Government exists for a reason, and our constitution has made it clear the welfare, the security, and the welfare of the people. We therefore cannot concession everything. That's why I'm opposed to this just ruthless privatization, because the most inefficient entity we have in the country is governance. Why is nobody talking about privatizing Aso Rock? That's the most inefficient. Our public service it is, but they will not talk about privatizing it.
So we should privatize it.
No, because if they say
if we privatize it, President Buhari and everybody, they are privatized.
No, the point is, because if you say privatization is the solution,
yes.
How come we are not talking about the most inefficient sector in our national life? So for me, privatization is not the way forward. We have seen even privatization going bust in other parts of the world.
All right, I think we'll leave it at that. Many thanks for coming on the program. All right, I've been speaking with Babatunde Oluajo, who is a governance and policy analyst. He's an anti-corruption activist and a Chevening scholar. He also serves as the anti-corruption advisor for the Integrity Group. That's the much we can take. Many thanks for your tweets. Let's keep the anti-corruption fight conversation going, isn't it? You said that as citizens, we should advance education on anti-corruption, because there's a nexus between between corruption and poverty. So many thanks. So keep the conversation going. It's not just as we, preparing for elections. Let's get out corruption from our vicinity. All right.